It's been months since the Kerbals have had a successful space mission. Donnelly and Kilbur Kerman sit in Orbitropolis, the last success of the Kerbal space program, waiting for the next mission to come to them as it floats softly over the Kerbin skies. But today's mission and focus is going to be on trying to get some Kerbals back up there and to continue our quest to try and go to Jool. As this episode of Mothership Jool, I'm going to be taking a look at the redesigns, the relaunch of the whole mission after a bunch of failures, catastrophic failures last time. Today we're going to be looking at multiple parts. Here is the Jool drone carrier, Cat's Cradle, called that because of all the struts, containing 6 drones that'll be able to go around, or actually 2, 4, 6. Multiple drones, we'll say a number count later on, but a bunch of drones strapped onto one rocket, just being able to transport them to the Joolian system. Their goal is to go to the different moons, some to crash, some to land, one to go into Jool. Another is the Jool orbital station. This will dock, and this also has the transfer stage. As you can see, the stack separator there. There are 16 nuclear rockets attached to this, and a space lab. That's right, the science lab is no longer going to the surface of Lathe. It's going to be staying on the surface. Maybe that's for the best. Lots of science there, and look, putting on some docking ports for some hopes of reusing that that's part that is the transfer stage later. But the top part is going to be detaching and landing. You can see the landing legs pointing the right way. And the other part, the Lathe lander, redesigned now with jet technology, which is something that I've been hesitant to use for so long in Kerbal Space Program. But if I'm flying the Lathe, which supposedly has oxygen in there, as someone still has Bill Kerman in the ship manifest, that's awkward and unfortunate, but what can you do about it? We're going to have our first test flights here with the Lathe lander, because apparently, according to scans, Lathe has oxygen in the atmosphere, so this should be able to go through there. And you can see that I'm doing some of the action groups here. There's multiple sets of landing struts, because this is also designed to land separately. We're going to be doing 2 flight tests. One for the landing into Lathe. As you can see, that's just going to be a quick ascent here as you get your nice, loud, high-pitched jet engines. Not the straightest up launch ever, but I do have action groups both for different sets of landing legs, as I don't want them all hitting, and for actually cutting off the engines. Having an action group for cutting off the engine jets is actually very important. Now, I did go through a lot of different redesigns for trying to get this to work as something that would have enough Delta V to make it out, and I just kept going back to jet engines. They weren't really something that I had used before, and I unfortunately forget what source I looked at that inspired me to make it this way, but the idea is that the jet engines are all going to detach at some point, and then you have another transfer stage with a Poodle engine. And I've not really used the Poodle engine too much, just because, at least in my pre-career mode days, there were other engines that were unlocked, but the Poodle seemed to fit the specs best right now. So we have gone up to 3,000 meters. The main goal here is just to test and see with the parachutes, with the jet-assisted landing, as you can see just how much fuel's in there. Will this be able to land softly and safely? So there are the landing gears. Going back down there is John Michael and Thongbree Kerman are testing this out. Multiple parachutes. You can see no attempted mitigating risk is on there. As I turn back on, just testing, toggling, and untoggling the engines is very important. Just want to make sure that all of that works, because if you detach your jet engines without shutting them off, they can be just missiles that fly right into your craft, and you don't want that. You can hear me revving up the engine because I do not want the ship to be going much more than 100 or 90 meters per second when the chute's deployed. That's how you do a jet-assisted landing or an engine-assisted landing, because I was having so much trouble for so long getting these ships to just explode or crash apart, because the forces from the parachutes pulling them up would go too fast. Turns out it's just because the ship was just going too fast, and it's like you pull a rubber band multiple directions, harder or softer. Sometimes it can adjust to it, sometimes it can't. Maybe a rubber band, not the best example. But if you did see, looking up there, you can see clouds over the sky. This is the first episode that does feature the City Clouds and Lights mod in it, and I do have the HD upgrade for that. I also have the World Replacer mod installed, which lets me have a nice background for the skybox, and you'll be able to get a view of that a little bit later. But for now, just final jet assisted landing. Want to be at 6 meters per second or less. That was a harder thud that I like, but slight slope Still made it. You can hear the engines still going. I probably should cut those off. And that's where you want to toggle that again. But right there, successful test landing. That's more than I can say about the other ships here. Plenty of fuel, pretty much all of the fuel that's on there. Practically only oxygen using, and just testing to make sure the ladders go all the way down as well. They do. So we're moving on to the next test, which is, let's see if this can go into orbit, and let's see if it can go back and land. Now, Lathe has a much shorter atmosphere. You do not need nearly as much delta V to get into orbit and land out of Lathe, or to get back up and rendezvous out of Lathe, as you would Kerbin. But the reason I'm doing this test is just to make sure, does this all work? Now, one thing with jet engines, and this is something that I wasn't as sure of at the time, is when do you do your gravity turn with your jet engines? And you can see that I do my gravity turn way earlier than normal here, because you're not really worrying as much about efficiency of fuel like maybe you were if you're using rocket fuel, because you're using so much oxygen just to get through, and especially with the design of this ship, where I'm going to be dumping so much of the mass once the air intakes stop doing their job. I just do my gravity turn really early because I want to, instead of going in a straight line to 10,000 meters where I start to lose oxygen anyway, I'd rather get as much acceleration as possible with my jets as much as possible. So you can see I'm not getting off the throttle. We're at 200 meters per second with the surface. We're going to push it as hard as we can. Now, I don't have as many air intakes as I could. I don't have aero spikes installed, or I'd love to have that, especially because they're lower profile. That took me a while with those jet engines to figure out how to get it without having them scrape in the landing, which is one reason we have multiple stages like this. But you can see the apoap's going pretty high. The air's still coming in pretty strong. And right now, just flying up, 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 just trying to get as high as I can. Because if I'm able to actually orbit around Kerbin, that's going to say the ship's specs go above and beyond what's necessary for landing for Lathe, and I would love to have that be a problem. That's a good problem to have. Doesn't mean I necessarily cut out some fuel, because I would like to have those fuel tanks. If there is excess fuel here, I can always transfer it to other stages for other parts of the mission. But for now, you can see the airspeed going up, the air intake starting to go down. We're leaving the lower atmosphere, so there's not going to be much left. Now, if you want to have a massive spin-out burnout, you let it flame out. But you see I turned off the engines with the action group. There falls away the jet engines. And what you get instead is just flying up with the Poodle engine. And a lot of things happen there at once. I cut off the engines before they could flame out. And the reason you want to do that is because the engines will not flame out at the same time. And that'll send your ship kind of on a wild tailspin. And this Poodle engine should be enough to get this ship high, high, high into the air. In fact, I'm going to skip the pleasantries and just say, hey guys, we are in orbit. This ship is capable of orbiting and flying around Kerbin. As you can see, the pretty night sky from the City Lights and City Lights mod. And clouds. I'm sorry I'm putting you through all of this madness, but all I'm trying to do here is just to get myself to land back on land. And I do love landing in that desert rocky area right there. But that's going to be the plan, is just to go around, go around, go around. I will be doing an aero capture for Lathe, and then we're going to be practicing the landing. But this is the return stage. I'm not going to have the ship return as one body. The orbital station and the Lathe lander are going to be returning separately. That's to try and, in case one gets lost, to sort of save the other. But more importantly is that this one needs to survive in a way where the science doesn't get destroyed, because this is going to be the major science boat. This mission should be able to get me to max my tech tree between what I broadcast back home from the probes and what I return from the Lathe landing. You can't land on Jool, or I could try and send something that could land on Jool, but it's certainly not going to be able to come back up. So we do get the nice atmosphere. You get the nice skybox that is the real galaxy picture in the background. I think that's 4K resolution, might be 8K, I'm not sure. It's big. It's bigger than what can really make a difference on 720p, which is the maximum resolution that I upload. Thanks, Time Warner Cable. We see the nice flame out. I do not have the deadly reentry mod. I could put that in later, but we're not doing that right now, especially since deadly reentry seems to really dislike aero braking, and aero braking is going to be very important. So I am not making it to the flatlands of the desert. This is some of the most mountainous terrain in all of Kerbin. This is going to be a very dicey landing. So here we go, back to normal speed. As you can see, John Michael not looking too pleased. Thornby, I think that's how you pronounce it, looking a little constipated. But there we go, these different parachutes just going on. You can see the two drogue chutes and the other chutes just all attached to it. And the parachutes look like they kind of pass through the materials bay, but not too bad. But once again, trying to do an engine-assisted landing here, assuming I have some fuel left, because I do not want these chutes to open when I'm too fast, because this could tear the ship apart. And that's just part of me. I've played this game for a while, but yet at the same time, there's always things you can learn to do and improve. But these are not going to open up until about 500 meters up. And since we are in the mountainous regions, we're pretty high up, but we are going to a pretty extreme slope. And I do not want to land on a slope on Lathe. I'm actually not sure how hilly or mountainous Lathe is, because I don't have a probe scanner going around it doing the kind of, I don't want to, the Kethane mod is a good one where it does scans of the surface all around. And that's something I can look into for maybe other possible journeys, but there's the spot shadow, there's ground scatter, not a lot of ground scatter. And if you want to see trees in Kerbal Space Program or rocks, you go to the options menu and you turn on ground scatter. Very good to know, but unfortunately, this could be really tough because I can't really adjust the incline of my ship as we get, oh, crew report, yay, 3.5 science. So we get the nice zoom out, zoom in. But last of the parachutes, 9.4 meters per second, still a little too fast. Probably should turn on my engine. But part of it is that we're higher in the atmosphere. But that's a weird shadow all of a sudden. But yeah, we're a little higher in the atmosphere, so the parachutes aren't doing as much. And because I didn't do the engine adjustment, explosion, this would be a real pisser if I lost like a lathe materials surface sample just because of that. So noob landing, guys. I don't think you guys are going to be at the cockpit for this mission. The docking port fell off too, but they survived, which is more than I can say for some of the previous tests. So some explosions, people not dying. I will call that more of a success. This vehicle has well shown its viability. Let's look at the Jool orbital station, which I want to show you just some bugginess that I ran into. I put struts up and down and left and right on this thing. Yet for some reason, the little wiggle that happens when the ship renders in just would turn this thing into a Jenga block something. And just all kinds of explosions, which I know we love our explosions in Kerbal Space Program, but I'd really like to actually be able to launch. And you'll see that I do press F3 from time to time. You're going to see this throughout this series, especially with launches like this concerned. I press F3 from time to time just to make sure that I don't have random parts. I have major problems with the stack separators that are in the middle of this. And I have major problems with docking ports in terms of ship stability. So you're going to see me here. And I apologize for the cough. I have been a little sick the past week, which is why I've been slow on some updates. But yeah, it's just flying up here. So far, things are going good. We have Georgia and Lober Kerman. And right now, the stages are still there. The fuel lines, thank God, are working. And one other nice thing about putting this up piecemeal and building it in orbit is that I don't have to have that giant launcher monstrosity that ended up bugging out so much every single time. So that's a good deal too. But you can see the lander can up top, the science bay as well. This is not a fully staffed vehicle right now, or it might be fully staffed, but it doesn't have the big two survivors on here. This is because, after all, Jebediah in the last mission, you may have seen that his comm blanked out, but it was just a severe injury. He was not killed. It wasn't a huge fall. Unfortunately, Kerbals, as you may well know, are very good at bouncing back very quickly, and he will be available in time for the Jool mission, but he's not going to be doing any of the test flights, much to Jeb's disagreement, because he thinks he's good to fly. But we all know Jeb, he's a little space crazy. So just going up, doing the ascent, getting to about the optimal 150, and you don't want to go much over 150 meters per second in the lower atmosphere. In fact, I should probably be going a little slower right now. But so far my fuel is still going pretty well. Probably want to wait to do the gravity turn until I ditch the next two fuel tanks, and that is more from a stability standpoint. So going to accelerate here just to let you know, okay, we're going above the clouds, turning here. And then I don't ditch the fuel tanks until after that turn. And once again, that's just stability. Now, you may notice that I'm burning through fuel pretty fast to push. And what it's going to end up happening is that this ship is just too heavy for my launching system to make it all the way up. But fortunately, I have 16 nuclear rockets attached to this. Now, I've seen plenty of videos that have people have maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe 5. And that's going to be plenty good to get you through space and push you to space if you want to do some kind of a 20-minute transfer burn, 30-minute transfer burn, something like that. Call me impatient, I kind of want to get to places a little bit faster, and one nuclear engine by itself has very, very low impulses. We get a very nice view of what would be the Milky Way or some kind of galaxy view of a spiral galaxy right here, assuming that the Kerbals live in a spiral galaxy. Kind of a big assumption, but that's what the skybox for default says too. If it were an elliptical galaxy, we'd see just a much bigger blur of stars everywhere. But anyway, you can see that over here, right here, is the fuel tanks are cross-feeding incorrectly. I have the fuel lines, and you can see me checking here. For some reason, the fuel lines are turned properly, but they're not flowing where they should. The engines are not supposed to be going from the end last. So that's something that's going to have to be fixed or replaced, because I didn't do that. I didn't make that mistake. But right now you can see those 16 engines are pushing this thing up real hard. And actually pretty efficiently, all things considered, because it takes a lot of delta V to get to Jool. And this is going to be one of the big pusher, and it is going to be a big pusher unit, despite warnings that I've gotten in terms of it's going to wobble if it's really big. Well, you know what? I'm doing it anyway. So just doing the test here, can I get this ship into orbit? It needs to be able to get into orbit. This part needs to. And I'm not too concerned about dumping fuel for my nuclear rockets here, because my goal is to get this up here, get it assembled, refuel the whole shebang at Orbitropolis before I send it off. And that's where those docking ports are nice, because I can actually take off and reattach fuel there as needed. So there we go, just adjusting my orbit, and we have a good orbit. As this ship is actually surprisingly nimble, but you can see I've gone ahead, I've detached everything, because we're just going to go to the lander, and what in the world? Lober Kerman is by himself all of a sudden. I love how these things get buggy sometimes. It's like nobody's in the pilot seat. I'm pretty sure what I did in between is send somebody to the science bay, and now nobody is piloting this ship as it's going to be landing in the desert. You can see the stack separator and the other nuclear rockets just going down, and this is to test the landing for this. Now, what's going to be a little more challenging is that this, while lighter than other lander portions that I've had in the past, is not going to be able to engine assist at all. So what I have to have here is something that is stable enough to actually land. As you can see, a very nice moonrise over and through the thick atmosphere as we are just careening our way into the atmosphere. This is a very fast, very shallow angle. I almost wonder if it would be in real life a little bit too shallow, but better people to ask than me. I am time accelerating through this. So what we get is lander legs down, parachutes out, and Lober is so far in pretty good business. Just doing some final observations, testing other things. I didn't action group these science pieces, but we do have 2 drogue chutes on the materials bay, and okay, we see Minmus in the background, but I'm having to manually cut those chutes. They did manage to slow me down quite a bit, but unfortunately, because of where the lander can is, it's funny. It's like, hey, we're upside down. But while I could move those up, I really like the positioning of the other main parachutes. So while that flip upside down looks weird, it did a lot to slow me down. I actually almost like that. I mean, everything should be strapped in. You're traveling into space. And if you notice, survival. And then finally we get the drone part here. And this is not just, okay, we're doing a test flight for this. There's no living person in here. So all I'm going to be doing is, you can see this wobbles like crazy for some reason, as I do have a bunch of SAS equivalent stuff from all the drone cores on it, although I haven't unlocked the max drone cores. This is actually going to be going straight up to Orbitropolis, and the reason for that is because there's nobody on here, and once it's up there, it can just sit and wait, as long as I can attach it successfully to the space station. Now, I do have decouplers attaching these different drone parts, as we do have 6 drones. I miscounted before. One little feature that I like to point out is the helper assist engines here, and the reason you have those on the side are for parts like this, to help the actual transfer. As I do know that I am going to need to make some little burns like this, and those are feeding from the big Rockamax engines. So once that's done, I can ditch those engines and get that weight down, because this is a pretty precisely calculated this is a pretty precisely calculated mission to Jool. I do expect to have a good excess of fuel to get back, but I want to make sure, but it's not like I'm going overboard. I want to make sure that the delta V is pretty close. So I'm showing accelerated, attempting to get into Orbitropolis. It's not moving very fast, but I mean, this is a big unit to try and move around, turn around. But you do get some nice views of the clouds. So just going to time accelerate and get things a little bit closer, or try to. But yeah, this is the drone portion of this. And there's 6 drones. That leaves 1 left over. There's the moons. One of them is not going to Lathe because Lathe is going to have a landing mission. One's going to go into the Julian atmosphere, and I'm not exactly sure how far in it'll be able to broadcast from, because I'm pretty sure probes that are sent into the Jupiter atmosphere just kind of get destroyed immediately and can't really broadcast back. I know we've shot a few things in to try and make it work, and we know very little. So, and by the way, you will see some pauses here from time to time. I think that's just because of real life concerns and things come up, because that does happen. But Orbitropolis not far away, targeting a docking port. One nice thing about this is because everything has, all of these drones have, all the drone lander things have RCS equipped. This is really nimble in terms of RCS. Unfortunately, it also means it is really hungry in terms of RCS. And because I have the controls oriented very strangely, you'll notice that I'm accelerating into the, not into the, I don't remember what my nodes are called anymore. But everything's kind of reversed on the nav ball. But you work with it, and you can see I do have the docking ports here. All I'm going to try and do is dock with Orbitropolis. It'd be awesome. It'd be fantastic. Target a docking port. Should be pretty simple, but I start to have some concerns right about here. As I think to myself, I thought Kerbal Space Program, it didn't matter what size the docking ports were. It just, if you put something up to something, they'd figure out a way to dock. I mean, they're the same brand, but maybe it's kind of like the Poodle and the Grand Mastiff or something, where technically they're dogs and they're the same species and they can technically breed with one another. Just anatomically, they can't mate with one another. And if you're not sure why that is, a Grand Mastiff and a Poodle are very, very different sizes. Think about it yourself. But that's kind of what I run into here. It's like, hey, this docking port looks nice. Can I put my drone carrier into it? And the answer to that riddle is actually going to be no. So unfortunately, as much as I'm trying to dock here, and we're going to see right here the approach, the attempt at insertion, the 8th grade health class jokes or whatever going on, what's going to end up happening is that I'm going to need to send something up here to make it work. And what I could do, and probably should do more than likely, is just send an attachment, another Rockamax fuel tank, with a tiny fuel attachment on the end of it, and then have some kind of big docking port on the other end, or better yet, something with stretching arms that'll let someone else dock from further away. So kind of an extension of the space station. But that's not really what's happening right now. I mean, I can assemble everything near Orbitropolis just fine. I do have the little tug. But one design flaw I've run into with that tug, unfortunately, is because the way the fuel tanks are up there right now, they don't have RCS on them. So it's very, very difficult. You may remember that from the Orbitropolis episode. It gets very wonky going there, but there we go. There we go. Space anatomy lesson. It's the size that does matter after all. After all this questioning, wondering, worrying about your self-esteem, you're just too big for the space station. And I actually ran the space station. So that's going to take some fixing. It's like, hey, we have an automated ship here that just rammed into poor Donley Kerman. It's like, I'm just trying to sit up here for 3 months. I don't think anyone's ever going to relieve the space station crew. I don't know. But what I'm going to do at this point is just put this drone carrier into a parking orbit. Try and keep it reasonably close to Orbitropolis. And next episode, I've had some very successful tests with all of these. I think it is time to, I almost said Wonder Cats. Well, it's time to Voltron assemble this, I think. Put it into space and kick our way to Jool, because the launch window is right around the corner. And I want to get this sent to Jool, and I want to go ahead and get this mission started. After all the failures, I'm very excited that Reiterations have succeeded. So that's it for now. This is Way to Fail with another edition of Mothership Jool. I hope you enjoyed seeing some successes after copious failures. And next time we're going to be launching the Green Giant and seeing what exactly we can do across the stars. Hope you liked it. See you next time.